So, hey, Amanda Heads, I'm Lucy, and no matters a lot tonight. I'm going to have the honor to interview DS, the leader and founder of Estrangement, and he's right now in Australia, and this is really, really cool, huh? So, welcome, DS, and my first question is, Estrangement is one of those bands which really get our attention by being completely original and inviting the listener to a journey through an extreme or funeral doom with classic music pieces. So have you got this idea of, how have you got this idea of mixing doom and classic music elements?
When we first started Estrangement, or when I first started, I suppose, the idea was always to create something that was a bit different and that had a lot of changes involved in it. And people often talk about similarities between heavy metal and classical music, but I've never really found them to be quite as similar as what people suggest. So the idea was, how much classical music can we fuse with metal and still keep it to be extreme doom? So from that being the starting point, all of these classical influences just started to seep into the music, and we just use them wherever we can.
Okay, all right. So Disfigure Mentality album was released at the end of 2022 by Stasian Dev Records. So please explain the title of the album and the conceptual idea behind it, if there's one.
So the album title is meant to be sort of provocative, I suppose. It's the juxtaposition of just disfigurement and the word mentality. And that's just a combination of those two concepts, which pretty much describes the music in general. We wanted something that was striking, but also thought-provoking, which is where the title came from.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how has been the feedback of the album so far?
Overwhelmingly positive, which has been fantastic. I thought there'd be I guess, a group of people that didn't really understand it. But those people might be out there, but they haven't said anything. So all the feedback that we've received from other parties has been really positive. People seem to really like it, and we're grateful for that. But at the same time, I was kind of looking forward to a few people saying, I hate this, and I wanted to hear why they would, but it hasn't happened yet. It might still,
Good.
but it hasn't happened yet. Yeah.
All right. Good. So, Clusters is a short silent film released as the official video clip for the track with the same name, and it's disturbing and really well done, in my opinion. So, Childlike Bewilderment was also a silent movie created for the track of Begribenis. I think I'm pronouncing it wrongly. EP released in 2014. Are short films a standard for estrangement video clips?
Kind of. So they've come about through a good friend of mine and a good friend of the band is a director. His name's Michał Imielski, and he directed both of those film clips. The first one we did as sort of a bit of an experiment. We weren't quite sure what to do. But then when Clusters was composed, it's probably the most intense song on the album. We had an idea, what can we do to really emphasize the intensity of that piece? And we just decided to go with this theme. The theme actually is almost like a bit of a dream state where someone is just terrified of something, but you're not actually sure what it is. And that was all we kind of went in to the clip with in mind, and that's what came out. So
okay. So that because that would be my next question. Yeah, how have you developed the idea for the video clip? So that was a dream, actually. And who had this idea?
it's actually a dream that I had as a child, actually, and I think it's a common dream that many people have. But the dream is ultimately you're running from something that is terrifying, and the more you run, the less energy you have, and you become increasingly exhausted. And the only thing that's motivating you is to escape from this thing, but you don't know what it is, and you never see what it is. and eventually you collapse in exhaustion and just accept that something is going to happen. And that's the part where you wake up. And so that was the feeling that we thought we'd try to recreate with the images for clusters.
Okay, nice. Good. So could you compare through your personal visions the EP and the album Disfigurement Mentality?
Yeah, so the EP was still a band developing its sound and putting things together as a sort of, I guess, a blueprint for the album. That's actually why we did the EP. So when I first started recording the EP, the idea at the time was to do an album. And then we got sort of halfway through the song and thought, this song sort of stands on its own. It's sort of our first attempt at a non-demo recording, and it should just sort of sit by itself. And so we decided that we'd make that a split EP. And then once that was released, we thought, okay, now it's time to really knuckle down. And that was when Ligaminsa joined on double bass and started working with me on the classical compositions and the metal ones as well. And then we kind of thought, it's time to do an album now. We're very ready. And we did it.
Okay, nice. Good. So A Lake of Ghost is a tribute CD to My Dying Bride, released in 2017, which Estrangement took part of the lineup. So tell us a little bit about how was it?
That was a really good experience because before that, I didn't really feel connected to a community. And that invitation for us to come on board, I ended up meeting a number of other musicians from the Doom scene that I'm sort of still in contact with today. So that was a really good experience. It came about because the website doommetal.com have always been really supportive of Estrangement. They reviewed the demo and the EP, and they'd done some interviews with me. They were just really, really supportive people. And when they had the idea to do the My Dying Bride compilation, Mike from doommetal.com reached out to me and said, you know, we'd like you to be a part of this. Would you enjoy it? And we just said, yeah, of course we would. So it came about from there. And then we ended up meeting a number of other musicians and other people from the scene through the process. So it was really rewarding.
Nice. So could you introduce us the other members of the band and how have you met each other?
Yeah, okay. So there's me on several instruments. Then Ligaminsa plays double bass predominantly and also helps out with some of the other stringed instruments. Cha is the violinist and Euterpe is the flautist. So I first met Cha probably 20 years ago. We're old friends. And when Estrangement first came about, she came on board first. And then Euterpe I met through a new area that I'd moved to, and she was a very serious flute player, and she loved folk metal. And I said, well, I don't quite play folk metal, but it's kind of close. And so she came on board from then. And then I met Ligaminsa some years later, and he's quite a profound double bassist, especially with his performances. He performs all around Sydney and the world, actually. And so I asked him to join the band, and he came on board just before we started recording the album.
Mm-hmm. So you have clearly a strong influence of classic music, as we can see on your videos performing on the YouTube channel of Estrangement. By the way, the link will be is on the description of this interview. And some improvisations on the acoustic guitar and piano. So they are, by the way, really beautiful and touching. So how and when all this connection with classic music has started?
So I started playing guitar as a teenager. That's still my main instrument, is the guitar. And when I became interested in the guitar, I wanted to learn to play it in as many different ways as I could. And one of those was classical guitar. And then eventually I became interested in flamenco guitar. So I've had that background through the guitar all my life. The other instruments, though, I've just picked up as an adult student, is what they call you when you learn an instrument as an adult. And I've just tried to take, I guess, a sense of experimentation and enthusiasm to these instruments and just play them as best I can. So I don't have any background on piano. I've just managed to mess around on keyboards and figure things out for myself.
Mm-hmm.
When I first started playing the cello, I got some lessons because I heard that you could injure yourself quite badly playing cello if you didn't do it properly, like in terms of your posture and the like. But aside from the guitar, everything else I'm self-taught, and a few lessons on cello when I started. So it's just a passion that I take to the instruments and just see what I can do with them, really.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and now, which are your main metal influences as a musician?
I'm really influenced by the creative bands, the highly creative bands. So I like a band when you hear them for the first time, you immediately think, I've never really heard anything like this before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That means that I'm a fan pretty much of a time for metal as opposed to you know, all types of metal. So in the 90s, when Funeral Doom, black metal, and death metal were all pumping out all these different sounding releases, that was the ultimate time for me because all the bands sounded different. They were all sort of wonderful and varied in their own way. And then over time, as more bands sort of joined the scene, then the genres started to sort of settle, you know, and then you end up with like lots of bands that sound quite similar. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just how art works.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it's really the 90s boom that's left its biggest mark on me. And sort of hearing bands like Funeral Doom bands like the Gotham, Skepticism, Esoteric, and then black metal bands like the Norwegian Wave, and then Swedish death metal, and then Florida death metal, and all of those little pockets have these great elite bands that played wonderfully. And that they're my influences back when albums were very different, very varied, and very unusual. And I'm not trying to say modern bands are bad. Modern bands are still fantastic, but that creative wave is very much stapled to that time in the 90s. And you can always pick bands that have come from that era because there's just that spark, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so when I think of my influences, as you can probably see a couple of them on the walls behind me, they're all bands that were pumping out albums in the late 80s and early 90s, really.
Mm-hmm. Good. And which are your influences besides metal? I mean,
Well, I guess
other
classical
kinds.
music is probably an obvious one. I guess I just really enjoy music that is intense and that hits you, like just punches you, right? Like, so dramatic music that has an intense feeling of drama or misery or passion, whatever the genre is, if it has those ingredients, I'll still like it. So some genres have that feeling much more prominently than others. For example, I mean, um, country music doesn't necessarily have a sense of violence to it, for example, but classical music does, and extreme metal does. Jazz often has an atmosphere of just insane craziness where everybody's playing in things that feel completely disconnected, but then are also connected in some kind of way. So when I kind of think of music that I love and that inspires me, I don't necessarily think in terms of genre. It's just the mood and the feeling and the
Mm-hmm.
frenetic nature of the music that's going to draw me in. So if it's got those ingredients, I'll like it no matter what genre it is.
Okay. All right. And now I have a question that it's a classic question that I ask almost everyone who is interviewed on my law. That is, imagine that you are a bad guy and you got in trouble and had life imprisonment as a sentence, and you can have nothing with you but 3 albums that you can listen for the rest of your life because one of the guards of the prison is a nice guy and gave you them as a gift. So which albums would you choose and why?
Okay, I'm going to cheat here a little.
Okay.
If it was just going to be 3 albums forever, I'd make sure one of them was a compilation album so that I could hear at least 10 or so different bands in that way and keep that going. One of the CDs would have to involve a particular classical music piece, which is the Sixth Symphony by Lepo Sumera, which is probably one of my favorite pieces of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of the third one, I really don't know. I don't know if, as long as I had access to at least half a dozen bands from from the 90s and my favorite classical pieces, I'd probably just pick a wild card, something I'd never heard before. I'd ask the
Oh.
guard to give me his favorite CD, and we could listen to that together for the rest of our
Really?
lives. Yeah.
Are you sure about that? That's the first time I have this answer. Really, really creative and different. I don't know if I would do something like this because, we never know. But anyway, good. All right. And would you like to have to finish our interview? Would you like to leave a message to your fans who are watching us?
Definitely. Look, I'd just like to say thank you to everybody that's reached out to us. A lot of people have come forward and sort of just expressed appreciation for what we do. And if you're interested in doing that, we're always happy to hear from you. We're going to start recording again this year, so we plan to release more music in due course. It's a doom metal album, so it's going to take a while, but we're going to start it soon, and we look forward to getting that out to you guys.
Okay. Really, really nice. Okay, so thanks for the interview. Thank you all, guys, for watching us, and stay heavy.